October 1932. Humboldt County, California.
The rain in Humboldt County didn't just fall, it hammered. It relentlessly assaulted the tar paper roof of the shanty, drowning out the groans of the ancient redwoods surrounding them. Up in the crawl space, 15-year-old Jack lay flat on his stomach, the rough-hewn floorboards pressing into his ribs. The air up here was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. Curled against his left flank was Buddy, an old coonhound whose breathing rattled like a broken engine.
On his right sat Barnaby, a scarred tabby cat, eyes wide and glowing in the gloom.
Jack didn't move. He barely breathed. He just listened. Through the gaps in the floor, the yellow light of a kerosene lamp sliced into the darkness. Below, the air was thick with cheap tobacco smoke and the sharp tang of moonshine.
$50, Frank. That's the marker.
The voice was unfamiliar, low, smooth, and dangerous.
You pay up tonight, or we take it out of your hide. I ain't got the cash, Miller, his stepfather, Frank, replied. His voice was steady, lacking even a shred of shame. But I got a strong back for you. The kid. He's 15, stronger than he looks. Put him in the jagged camp up north. He works off my tab. You keep him till the debt is square.
Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. A labor camp. The kind of illegal operation deep in the timber where men went in and didn't come out.
He's scrawny, Miller grunted.
He's hungry, Frank countered. Feed him once a day, he'll fell trees like a man. Jack squeezed his eyes shut, waiting. He was waiting for her voice. Mom. She was sitting right there at the table. He knew the sound of her chair creaking. Say something, he begged silently. Scream, fight, anything. But there was only the sound of rain and the soft clink of a bottle hitting a glass. That silence hit Jack harder than Frank's belt ever had. It was a physical blow, snapping the last fragile tether, connecting him to this house. The hope he had been hoarding, that they were a family, however broken, turned to ash. Jack moved with the silent precision of a ghost. He reached for his canvas sack. Inside went his buck knife, a box of dry matches, and his grandfather's wool blanket. He nudged Buddy. The old dog rose stiffly. Barnaby was already at the attic vent, sensing the shift in the air. Jack didn't look back down through the cracks. There was nothing left down there for him. He pushed open the attic hatch leading to the roof. The wind bit at his face, cold and wet. "Come on," Jack whispered, his voice cracking. He slid down the slick roof into the mud, his two loyal shadows close behind. They vanished into the towering blackness of the redwoods, choosing the mercy of the storm over the treachery of home. The first 3 days were a blur of gray rain and green shadows. The deep timber of Humboldt didn't care about their misery. It was cold, indifferent, and vast. Every snapping twig sounded like Frank's boots crunching on the forest floor. Jack kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see the glint of a shotgun barrel or Miller's dark sedan forcing its way through the brush. They kept moving, pushed forward by a terror that bit sharper than the wind. By the third afternoon, the gnawing in Jack's stomach had turned into a dull, cramping ache. He huddled under the dripping canopy of a black oak, pulling a soggy heel of sourdough bread from his pocket. The last of it. Buddy whined, his tail tucked between his legs, shivering violently. Barnaby was nothing more than a wet lump of fur, trembling inside Jack's flannel shirt. "Here," Jack whispered. He broke the bread in two. He gave half to the dog and the other half to the cat. He ate nothing. The rain washed the crumbs away before he could even regret it. Dizziness hit him then. The cold wasn't hurting anymore. Instead, a dangerous warmth was spreading through his limbs, the liar's comfort of hypothermia. He leaned his head back against the oak's rough bark, his eyelids heavy. Just a minute, he thought. Just a quick nap. Woof! The sound cracked the silence. Jack jerked awake. Buddy was standing a few yards away, barking not at a squirrel, but at Jack. The old dog grabbed Jack's sleeve, tugging with a frantic strength he shouldn't have possessed. All right, I'm coming," Jack mumbled. Stumbling on numb feet, Jack followed the dog down a steep ravine, slipping through a thick curtain of ferns into a wind-protected valley. And there it stood. It was a redwood, but that word didn't do it justice. It was a titan, a survivor of 2,000 winters. Its trunk was as wide as a house, scarred by ancient lightning strikes. At its base was a massive triangular opening, a goosepen, as the loggers called it, hollowed out by fire centuries ago. But the tree was still alive, fighting toward the sky. Jack crawled inside. The wind died instantly. The ground here was covered in soft, dry duff. It didn't smell like the mildew and stale whiskey of Frank's shack. It smelled of amber resin, dry earth, and thyme. It smelled clean. He collapsed onto the dry floor, pulling Buddy and Barnaby close into a pile of warmth. As his shivering slowed, Jack looked up at the charred, protective ceiling of the tree. For the first time since he left the womb, the tightness in his chest uncoiled. This wasn't just a hiding spot. It was a gift. The paralyzing fear didn't vanish overnight. It just got shoved aside by the necessity of work. Jack stopped looking over his shoulder and started looking ahead. That deep-seated American instinct for self-reliance kicked into gear. The redwood wasn't just a hole to hide in anymore. It was base camp, and Jack was taking ownership. He became a nocturnal scavenger, raiding the outskirts of the town dump like a ghost. He dragged back Depression-era treasures, rusted corrugated tin, lengths of baling wire, and a torn oilcloth tarp. He shored up the drafty spots inside the hollow trunk, creating dry storage bins for firewood and smoked fish. The outside was his masterpiece. Jack spent days plastering river mud and thick slabs of green moss over the entrance, mimicking the tree's rugged texture. By the time he was finished, a man could stand 6 feet away and see nothing but solid, ancient bark. It was a proper fortress, hidden in plain sight. Inside, a new social order took root. Jack was the provider, running trot lines for catfish in the creek and setting snares for rabbits. Barnaby, purring like a buzzsaw, kept the scavenged straw bedding warm and ruthlessly patrolled for field mice. Buddy was the unwavering sentry, sleeping by the hidden door with one ear always cocked toward the wind. At night, nursing a small fire carefully shielded by stacked stones to hide the light, Jack realized the irony. Back in that dismal town, folks were starving and miserable in shacks. Out here, with nothing but a knife and his wits, Jack felt richer than a banker. He had absolute freedom. He had a home that had stood for 2,000 years. And for the first time, he had a family that didn't require payment to stick around. The bitter resentment toward his mother hardened into something useful. Iron-willed resilience. Winter didn't just arrive, it assaulted the valley. A record-breaking blizzard howled down from the north, burying Humboldt County under feet of white powder. The wind screamed through the canyons like a banshee, snapping smaller pines like matchsticks. Inside the redwood, it was warm. But the peace was shattered by a sound more terrifying than the storm.
"I see the tracks, boy. I know you're in there."
It was Frank. Desperate, unpaid, and fueled by a manic rage, he had followed Jack's fresh footprints before the snow could erase them. He was right outside the hidden entrance. Buddy went rigid, his hackles raised, a low guttural growl vibrating in his chest. Barnaby hissed from the rafters, eyes dilated. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't scramble into the corner this time. He sat cross-legged by the fire pit, his hand resting calmly on the handle of his knife. He wasn't the prey anymore. Thud. Frank threw his shoulder against the camouflage door. Thud. He kicked at the mud and moss reinforcement.
"Open up! You owe me that $50, you little ingrate!"
Frank shrieked, his voice cracking against the roar of the wind. But the redwood didn't budge. This tree had shrugged off lightning strikes and centuries of earthquakes. A drunk man's shoulder was nothing. The storm, however, was merciless. The temperature was dropping fast, turning Frank's sweat to ice. Through a small observation chink in the wall, Jack watched. He saw Frank's rage turn to panic as the whiteout conditions blinded him. The man stumbled, his face purple with cold, and collapsed against the massive roots, beaten not by Jack, but by the indifferent fury of the wild. Jack stared at the shivering heap that used to terrorize his nightmares. He could let him freeze. It would be easy. It would be justice. But Jack looked at his own hands. They were calloused and dirty, but they weren't stained with blood. He wouldn't let Frank turn him into a killer. Jack unlatched the door just an inch. He grabbed the rough, moth-eaten blanket, the one he'd taken from the house that night, and shoved it through the gap. "Take it." Jack's voice was cold, cutting through the wind. "And don't come back." Frank looked up, eyes hollow. He didn't fight. He snatched the blanket, wrapping it around his freezing frame like a shroud. Defeated, shamed, and small, Frank turned and limped away into the blinding snow, disappearing into the white void. Jack barred the door. He turned back to the fire, stoked the embers, and scratched Buddy behind the ears. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the belly of the mother tree, they were untouchable. The storm broke 2 days later, leaving the forest buried under a silence so deep it felt sacred. That's when Head Ranger Tom Miller found them. Tom had trekked up from the station, expecting to find a frozen corpse. When he saw the faint wisp of smoke curling from the base of the massive redwood, he shook his head, preparing himself for the grim task of hauling a body back to town. He pushed aside the moss-covered door, his badge gleaming in the winter sun. "Son?" Tom started, his voice authoritative. "You can't be out here. I've got orders to take you to the county orphanage." Jack didn't reach for his knife this time. He just stood up, wiped his hands on a rag, and gestured around him. Tom stopped. He looked around the hollow. He saw the rows of smoked trout hanging neatly from the ceiling. He saw the dry, raised sleeping pallet lined with clean furs. He saw a healthy dog and a fat cat contentedly napping by a smokeless fire. The place wasn't a hovel. It was a homestead. It was cleaner and warmer than the drafty orphanage dormitories down in the valley. Tom looked at Jack, really looked at him. The boy's eyes weren't hollow anymore. They were sharp, clear, and filled with a stoic determination that most grown men lacked. "I ain't going back, Tom," Jack said, his voice level. "I'm home." The ranger rubbed his chin.
In this part of the country, folks respected grit above all else. To drag this boy back to a cage would be a sin against the very spirit of the frontier. Tell you what, Tom sighed, unbuckling his pack. You know these woods better than my deputies. You keep an eye out for poachers and spot smoke during fire season. In exchange, I'll drop off flour, coffee, and ammo once a month. We got a deal? Jack extended a calloused hand. Deal. Jack never returned to civilization. He stayed in the timber, growing from a runaway boy into a local legend. To the loggers and hikers, he became the ghost of the Redwoods, an unseen guardian who cleared trails and left warnings before flash floods. Decades passed. The story ends on a quiet autumn afternoon. A man with silver hair and a weather-beaten face stands before that same ancient redwood. The dog and cat are long gone, buried beneath the ferns they loved. With a steady hand, Jack finishes carving into the thick, fire-scarred bark. Buddy and Barnaby. He runs his hand over the names. A silent tribute to the only family that never let him down. Jack looks up at the canopy filtering the golden sunlight. He realizes that while humans may cast you out, the wild will always take you in, if you have the courage to listen to it. What about you? If society turned its back on you tomorrow, would you have the skills and the mental toughness to survive in the wild like Jack? Or does the silence of the forest scare you more than the noise of the city? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed Jack's journey from survival to freedom, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon. We have more stories of American grit and survival coming your way.